Hi, this is Kogito, and I'm back for another Through the Ages video. So in the last video, we saw that I had just barely managed to win the second 4-player game in this group, thanks to a last-minute impact of science that someone else seeded that I won. Thus giving me a pretty significant lead in this group. We can see that I was a little bit of the sloth on 3-player games, so even after my opponent's 3-player game finished, I still have a 4-point lead over second place with one less game to play. So definitely in a good position to win this group, but obviously that can change in a hurry if I don't do one in the 3-player games. So those are really important. In this first 3-player game, we will see it's between, not one of my games with Pat Hope though, instead it's the game between me and the 3rd and 4th place finishers. The Sazmer is also pretty close to Fat Hope. So without further ado, let's take a look. In this game I'm playing second. We can take a quick look at the leaders and wonders. So what I noticed in Age 3, first of all, is that we have a few science leaders, Gates, Sid Meier, and Albert Einstein, as well as the Manhattan Project, albeit in a spaceflight. Manhattan Project also pairs well with Churchill, and there's no Gandhi, so military might be important in this game. There's also Fleming to pair with the Hollywood for potential theater synergy, also with Bach in the game, as well as Pierre, albeit with no internet. In Age 2, we also have an Ocean Liner Service plus Maria potential combo, which can be extremely strong, as well as Newton and Nobel to go with the science energy mentioned earlier, along with Harvard College. Indeed, there's what I would consider the 4 best Age 2 wonders all in this deck, so definitely leaving yourself open for an Age 2 wonder might be important in this game. In Age 1, I like to see which leaders like to be elected early and which late. We can see in this deck, most of the leaders prefer to be elected late, with the exception of Leonardo, maybe Michelangelo and Ziska in some situations, but generally speaking, most of these leaders want to be elected late, so ideally, we might want to go with an Age A leader with more value. The Age 1 wonders, I would say, are all, some of them are pretty strong. They're pretty good overall. You know, Machu Picchu and St. Peter's Basilica may be a bit less strong, but there's some theater synergy with St. Peter's. Machu Picchu can be good, so overall, this is a pretty strong deck of wonders, I think. As for taking the cards, Cleveland chooses the Engineering Genius over Boudica and Acropolis. I think that's certainly defensible. In fact, I will talk about Boudica now on my turn. So on my turn, I have 2 civil actions to pick cards with, and I think the major decision is between Boudica plus Acropolis, or just the Colossus. I'd like to talk about Boudica Acropolis first. This, I think, is a pretty good deck for Acropolis. In 3-player, you can definitely do a culture-focused strategy and have it work. There's Pierre, Gates, Sid Meier, all pair well with Acropolis, as well as Hollywood, of course. And Bach and Darwin in H2. Now, so I'm not opposed to the Acropolis in this case. My issue is more with Boudica, and the problem being that it's 3-player and Caesars in the deck. So as you probably know, Boudica in 3-player gives you the military resources if you're weakest or second weakest. So only one other player has to be stronger to more or less force you to building military, and you don't have to, but you know, not using value from your leader is never good. And that's just really common. I think, you know, when there's no Caesar, Sun Tzu, or Alexander in the deck, then it's usually fine. But when one of them is on the deck, especially Caesar or Sun Tzu, then like if I take Boudica, especially in this situation where, say, I take Boudica, I think Sazmo would probably take Pyramids or Confucius, and then Cleveland could very easily get... Well, not easily. They would have to sacrifice some to get Caesar plus Colossus, but they definitely could. And that would be pretty dangerous. And just, like I said, in general, like, one of my opponents would be pretty likely to get Caesar. Then I would have to use Boudica's I would have to build a warrior on the 3rd turn. Again, I wouldn't have to, but I probably would want to build a warrior on the 3rd turn with Boudica, and things would just get pretty awkward quickly. So I think this is a situation where Boudica, who's normally a very strong leader, isn't too good. She might still be alright, but I decided to instead take Colossus, especially since I think this is a pretty good Colossus game. There's Suez in the deck. There's a fair number of military leaders. In fact, I would say the 3 main military leaders, Genghis, Barbarossa, and Ziska, are all in the deck. Only Joan is missing, but you also have Columbus for extra colonization synergy with the Suez Canal. And there's also, of course, Caesar in the deck. And I figured there was a pretty decent chance that I would be able to get Caesar, because my opponents might not value him that well. And I think Caesar, while normally not that strong a leader, gets substantially stronger when you pair him with Colossus. So for those 2 reasons, I decided that the Colossus was a good card. in this game and better than Boudica would be. Sazmar ends up taking the pyramids. I think that's reasonable. This also notably leaves all the AJ leaders on 2 civil actions for Cleveland. So that's another. I think that's another reason not to take Acropolis in particular, because if I had taken Acropolis, then Caesar would have been on 1 civil action for Cleveland. But now Caesar, along with Confucius and Moses, are on 2. So Cleveland ends up taking Confucius for, which I think is the right choice. What I do disagree with, though, is Cleveland taking the Acropolis instead of building the mine. I think that there's times when it's not right to build the 3rd mine or the 2nd lab if you have urban growth or Clio. On turn 2, you almost always want to do one of those, because like this extra resource on turn 2 just snowballs so much down the line. You set yourself back much more than you might expect by not doing it. That's not to say that there are no circumstances where it might not be right. I'm sure there are a few, but they are very rare. And I don't think this is one of them, because all Cleveland is doing by not building the mine is getting this Acropolis. And if Cleveland hadn't taken the Acropolis, they would definitely have been able to get the Hanging Gardens. Well, yeah, I would have had to take 2 cards to get Hanging Gardens discarded. They wouldn't have done that. So even without the Acropolis, Cleveland would have gotten the Hanging Gardens, which I think is probably about as good as the Acropolis. Maybe it's a little bit worse than the Acropolis, but definitely not worse enough to justify skipping this mine. So, that's my opinion on this play. As for me, though, I was definitely happy to get Caesar with Colossus. Seemed good. You know, definitely, you know, Caesar and Moses. Moses is also pretty good with Colossus, but I think Caesar is arguably better than Moses with Colossus. And even if they're about the same, which maybe they're about the same, definitely Moses isn't worth that extra civil action. Cleo pairs pretty poorly with Colossus. And then I just did normal stuff. Sazmar takes Cleo. I think I would have done the same. I think Cleo pairs pretty nicely with pyramids. I know that's a controversial position, but I think it's fine to prioritize pyramids over lab for a little bit, especially in this case where Cleveland will definitely seed. From Sazmar's perspective, I will seed at least once, maybe twice. So there's pretty good odds of a rock development being revealed. Now, what I do disagree with on Sazmar is building the mine over the lab, thus skipping Cleo's bonus. So, like, think of it this way, right? Building the mine gives Sazmar an extra rock, but Sazmar loses a rock from not using Cleo's bonus. So basically, building this lab instead would have given Sazmar that rock that they're getting from building the mine this turn, as well as an extra science. So I think if my logic is correct, and I'm pretty sure it is, it's strictly worse to build this mine compared to the lab this turn. Cleveland Siege reveals the development of politics. So I, along with the foray that I had drawn on my first turn, I now draw a second event, which I was happy to see, so I could use both of my politics phases with Caesar. I also get some tactics, including a heavy cavalry tactic, which is notable with Genghis Khan on the row. Cleveland ends up taking the Swordsman for 2 civil actions, as well as building that mine they didn't build last turn. I think, given how last turn went, this is a reasonable play. Swordsman is probably the best card of the cards in this row. Warfare could also have been considered, potentially, but I think especially if Cleveland has an infantry tactic, which, I mean, maybe they're not because I think, but they might. But even if they don't, you know, always nice to have a military tech in hand, so. As for me, like I said, I, wanted to use both of my politics phases, get more control of the event deck. I end up revealing development of science as well as development of agriculture. I'm able to get out of corruption by building a lab. The question now is just what else to do with my turn. And it's a little bit of a difficult decision. I think the first decision I had to face, I don't think, I didn't necessarily want to take any of these cards. Well, maybe I do for 2 civil actions, yeah, because I'm out of corruption already. I think the first question that I want to face is to take Zisk or Genghis Khan. I think I do want to take one of them this turn. The other cards on the row aren't good enough to avoid just taking a leader and making sure I have them in my hand, especially since both of these, Caesar, the weakness with Caesar, as I should have mentioned previously, is that most of these leaders, like I said, want to be elected at the end of their age. Caesar is fine to keep for all of Age 1, but it doesn't give you economic benefits, so sometimes you do want to replace him with a better leader sooner. But in this case, I have 2 leaders that could both replace him and be better. So the question is which one to take. And I think with Genghis Khan being 1 civil action less than Ziska, and me having the heavy cavalry in my hand, I think Genghis is better. There's sort of a, more abstract debate you can have about Genghis Khan. I feel that he's one of the more underrated Age 1 leaders, frankly. I don't think he's, like, top tier or anything, but I think he's definitely, not flexible. He's not a general leader, because you really want him with heavy cavalry. If you have him with phalanx or something, then he gets a lot less, useful. But if you get him with heavy cavalry, I think he's a fine leader. If you consider he's basically giving you +2 strength, right? Comparing heavy cavalry to Legion. And, like, getting 2 strength just from your leader is quite good, especially in the early game and, like, late Age 1, beginning Age 2, which is when you have him. That 2 strength can make a huge difference between being weakest and strongest. And also, the 3 culture you get from him can't be underestimated. I think that's the major benefit he has over Ziska, who is usually favorably compared to Genghis Khan, and I think reasonably so. He is generally a better leader. But Genghis Khan will usually provide you more culture than Ziska, and that's not nothing. I think when it comes to early game culture, the conclusion I've come to, maybe more of a recent conclusion, is that you don't want to aim for just culture in, like, Age 1, early Age 2, most of the time, but it is very nice to have cards that, like, accomplish things for you while also giving you culture. One thing that I have sometimes encountered entering Age 3, when I focus, like, just strictly on economy and military and ignore my culture, is when I'm, like, 30, 40 culture behind my opponents heading into Age 3. That's not a death sentence. If you have a better economy than them, you have a better military than them, you can definitely overtake that lead, but it's something that, like, you have to consciously do, and it can actually take some luck sometimes. Maybe you have to draw into a war or 2, or a good Age 3 tactic, or maybe the card row has to line up for you to build urban buildings or something. Again, I'm not saying it can't happen or wonder, but it's just, it feels dicey a lot of the time, and sometimes I'm not able to catch up. So a card like Genghis Khan, who helps you in your military, one of the main things you want help with in the early game, while also giving you a fair amount of culture on the side, that's at least letting you roughly keep up with your opponents. Like, if you have, like, if he gives you, like, 12 to 15 culture, now you're not talking about, like, a 40-point lead, you're talking, like, a 25-point lead, maybe, your opponents have. That's, like, significantly more manageable, I think, so. Anyway, for that reason, if they were both on 1 civil action, I probably still would have taken Ziska, although it would have been close, because heavy cavalry is quite nice. But with Genghis Khan being 1 civil action less, and me having heavy cavalry, I think it's I was not that hesitant in taking him over Ziska here. The question is just what else to do, and so one option would have been, instead of increasing my population like this, I could have taken Genghis Khan and the swordsman. I think that definitely would have been defensible. The problem is then I wouldn't have had a free population, and I would have missed out on a potential development of religion or warfare, both of which would be very good for me. Cleveland is definitely seeding next turn. I would like to seed at least once or twice next turn, so the chances of one of those developments being revealed, neither of them have so far, is quite high. And I thought that spending 1 more civil action on this swordsman and risk not getting one of those developments would be too big a price to take. So that's why I increased my population. That leaves me with 1 last civil action and basically a choice between warfare and patriotism. And I think warfare is kinda the obvious choice. I'm in a situation here where I have Genghis, who's obviously a military leader, but his biggest weakness probably is that he doesn't give you a military action, unlike Ziska. And I also have Colossus, a wonder which, because it gives you draws immediately. Like, if you go into H2 with only 2 military actions, you have to discard most or all of the cards you draw out of it. That doesn't feel so good. So, warfare, letting me for sure have a 3rd military action, seemed important here. Warfare is at its weakest in 3-player, I think, because you have more of a chance of getting a Kanmon. But it's still pretty good. I mean, I think it's like a fine card. And especially, like I said, in this situation where I need it to give me a 3rd military action when I lose Caesar. And having warfare with Kanmon is still fine. Like, 5 military actions are definitely significantly better than 4, if you can get it, so. Anyway, I'm pretty satisfied with this turn, even in retrospect. I discarded the Fighting Band and drew no events to seed. Unfortunately, I just drew 2 more tactics that I'm not going to use and an aggression, so not a great draw there. Sazmar Seeds reveals that Development of Warfare, so I was rewarded for increasing my population. Last turn, Sazmar takes this guy. I think that's justifiable. Decides to prioritize. Because Sazmar took the Development of Warfare, they don't have a happy population for the lab, so they decide to build a stage of the pyramids instead. Makes sense. And they take up Patriotism with Ziska. If they have a cavalry, presumably they have a cavalry tactic, so they didn't want to take the swordsmen, winning for knights. They didn't have the civil action to take the knights after taking Ziska, building a stage of the pyramids, and increasing the population. So, I think this turn makes sense. Cleveland Seeds reveals Development of Crafts, event deck flips. Notably, I think, were there any food developments revealed? I'm not sure. I think there might have been one. I mean, obviously the event deck flipped quickly, not surprising with both Confucius and Caesar. Let's see, Development of Science. There was Development of Agriculture revealed, but it is there was no development of Settlement though. So a little bit of a low population game. Anyway, Cleveland takes the Knights, builds the Knights, and reveals that they have a heavy cavalry tactic of their own. So they decide to do this instead of building the second lab, which I think makes sense because it looks like they're planning on getting the heavy cavalry tactic instead, sacrificing their science to push strength, which is a justifiable strategy. It can definitely work out. I also take the it does mean, however, that Cleveland can't take the Development of Warfare, whereas I can, because I have Genghis Khan. I decide, after increasing my population, to get out of Uprising. Now it's a question of, okay, what else am I going to do on my turn? And I decide to go ahead and go for the Alchemy. I think that, you know, I could have tried prioritizing the Colossus instead, but I decided, because I had already taken this Warfare, obviously the downside of Warfare is it costs a relatively substantial amount of science, especially for this point in the game. And so the Alchemy seemed like a good choice here to counteract that. I liked it better than the Irrigation. I think for that reason, and also it's just, in general, a better card. In particular, as we can see, because I have to increase my population to get out of Uprising, whether I take Alchemy or Irrigation, I'm only able to upgrade one of them. So by upgrading one Alchemy, I will have enough science to play the Warfare next turn, whereas if I had upgraded only one Irrigation, I still wouldn't have been able to increase my population next turn. So I think that's also another reason to prefer Alchemy to Irrigation, as well as just sort of, in a vacuum, being a somewhat better card. At least, well, I think Irrigation is pretty good. This is still pretty early, so Irrigation definitely could be defended here. I think maybe the reason to take Irrigation would have been because I only am able to have 2 warriors right now, whereas I'm going to need 3 for the heavy cavalry. So the Irrigation could give me that 3rd warrior a turn sooner, depending on how the event deck looks. I did not seed, though I did seed a Foray, notably. So as long as I can stay ahead of Sazmar in strength, which seems plausible since I have Colossus, then I will be able to get a food windfall from the Foray that will let me have a 3rd population. So I think if it weren't for the Foray that I had seeded, then maybe Irrigation would have been better to, like I said, get me that 3rd population earlier. But I think given that I seeded Foray, the Irrigation is less helpful for me, whereas the Alchemy is very helpful to get me this Warfare going while still giving me science. Yeah. Anyway, and I also play the Fighting Band, even though I am obviously going to be replacing it with Heavy Cavalry. Losing 1 draw to be strongest, you know, while you have this event deck, you know, obviously Cleveland was pushing strength a little bit, so I think it's definitely worth it to be strongest this turn. I keep the 1 tactic I'm going to play, as well as the aggression. I draw at least 2 more suitable events, a Crusades in a developed territory. Sazmar finishes the pyramids, increase the population to finally build the 2nd lab, as well as taking an Irrigation, playing a Phalanx. Unfortunately, they aren't still missing that 2nd knight, but they probably figure, but with me having Genghis, I'm less likely to cut a knight, at least for high civil actions, so it's pretty likely that Sazmar will be able to get the 2nd copy. Cleveland Seeds reveals a Confucius event, so I think I'm pretty happy to see that, again, because I have this science to spend. Cleveland takes a monarchy, pretty good with Acropolis, as well as Barbarossa. Unfortunately, Cleveland did, I think, increase their population last turn, so that's a little unfortunate with Barbarossa, but he's still a good leader. Especially a good leader for Cleveland, because Cleveland is looking to get a lot of units into the military quickly with the heavy cavalry. And indeed, as we can see, they're only because they took Barbarossa, they're able to complete the heavy cavalry tactic this turn, which I think definitely makes him a very strong leader to pick. So I think this is a strong turn from Cleveland. I decided to seed twice, mainly looking for that foray that I seeded so that I can finish my heavy cavalry tactic. The first event revealed is the new deposits, which helps us all equally. The second event revealed is not the foray, the strategic territory. I only bid 2. I wasn't really looking to win this territory because I'm kind of short on population anyway, and I'm really looking to get 3 units into my military. I do bid 2, I think mostly to keep my opponents honest and not let any of them win it for cheap. Cleveland ends up winning it for 4, but that's a pretty substantial cost because they have to give up 2 units. Admittedly, the warrior is not doing anything for their tactic, but still giving up 2 units is pretty substantial, especially because as we can see, at least at the moment, Cleveland doesn't have knowledge of the foray. So at the moment, Cleveland is not able to rebuild their tactic. Of course, Barbarossa in general makes it easier to rebuild after winning a colony, but still, I was not... I don't think this is bad. Cleveland sacrificed a lot to get this colony, so I think it's, like, about even value. I thought a little bit about what I wanted to do this turn. I think there are basically 2 options, which is which of the power techs I want to take here, the Code of Laws or the Iron. And as we can see, I decided to go with the Code of Laws. The Iron could definitely be justified here. Obviously, it's strong. But I think the Code of Laws is also quite strong. And it's available for 1 civil action cheaper. And I don't need the Iron to spend my resources usefully this turn. So that's why I went with the Code of Laws instead of the Iron. Also, this is just the first copy of Iron, so I can still get the second copy if I want it. I think the question more is, do I want to finish the Colossus this turn, or do I want to upgrade a lab this turn? And I think both of them are justifiable. Definitely the Colossus, obviously, helping to ensure that I'll be stronger than Sazmar is nice. The extra colonization bonus for the, well, I think I had the colony that I know about is in the following event deck and not this one. So I might not, necessarily be using the colonization bonus on this event deck, but I might. You never know. Especially with Cleveland seeding Barbarossa. So I think finishing the Colossus definitely could be defensible, but obviously the lab is also defensible with me winning completely out of science now after playing the Code of Laws. Looking at I decided to do this because looking at Sazmar's position, we can see that Sazmar does not have any free happy population to put into the military. So it's looking like it should be pretty difficult for Sazmar to get stronger than me. Like, Sazmar, first of all, Sazmar would, if Sazmar, for example, elected against Ziska and then copy this fighting band tactic, they would still only be at 4 strength. So after Sazmar's turn, so during Cleveland and my turns, I would still be stronger than Sazmar and win the foray. Sazmar would have to sacrifice a fair bit, like destroy a building or something. Yeah, Sazmar would have to destroy a building, or I guess eat Uprising to get stronger than me, and that seemed really unlikely. So, because the main reason I would want to finish the Colossus, I think, would be to ensure I am in on the foray, and since it looks like I should be in on the foray, even without finishing the Colossus, because of how Sazmar's position looks like, I decided to value the extra science instead from upgrading the lab. Obviously, I am going to be finishing the Colossus next turn, though, so I might as well build a stage. Again, I could have spent these last 2 civil actions to take the Iron for 2 civil actions, but I just didn't see the need to, especially because I don't have the science to play it next turn anyway. I mean, maybe there'll be a Confucius event or another science event, but I don't have knowledge of any of those. So, with me, you know, not being able to play the Iron, and even if there is a science event, you know, maybe I would probably rather finish the Colossus and, you know, if there's a foray, build a 3rd warrior for the tactic, rather than upgrade Iron next turn anyway. So even if I took the Iron, I very likely would not be upgrading it until 2 turns from now. And 2 turns from now, there might be the second copy of iron on the row anyway. And the final reason not to take the iron is because I have something else that I can do with my civil actions instead, which is take this bread and circuses. It's available for only 1 civil action. It's a card that I will almost certainly want eventually regardless, or at least some happy face solution, because my next population is going to go into my military, and then when the age ends, I will be at this part. Hold on. When the age ends, after I increase my population once, then I'll be at this part of my yellow bank, and so if I don't have a happy face solution by the time the age ends, I will be an uprising with no good way to fix it. So this is going to definitely be a very, well, it will likely be an extremely valuable tech for me by the time the age ends, and it's available for 1 less civil action than the iron. Even though I probably won't play it for a while, I probably won't play the iron for a while either. So that's why I went with the circuses, 1 civil action cheaper. I drew a trade routes agreement and 2 events. We'll talk about those events on my turn. So if it doesn't seed, instead builds a temple. Not usually something you want to do, but Sazmar is getting to use the clear bonus by doing it, so I think it's defensible. Sazmar also upgrades 1 farm that will enable them to increase the population next turn, as well as replacing Cleo with Yanziska. I definitely agree with that. Cleo has, you know, finished her usefulness this turn. Oh, and I forgot to mention, but another advantage of my play is that I still leave iron on 2 civil actions for Sazmar, and I thought that was pretty... Sazmar would definitely very much wants the iron, right? Because they only have farm upgrades so far. So if I had left iron on 1 civil action for Sazmar, that would have been an argument for taking the iron. And maybe it would have at least, I think, been a lot closer. But since my play still left the iron on 2 civil actions for Sazmar, I think that was decisive in me taking bread and circuses instead. And Sazmar does do what I mentioned previously, which is adopt the fighting band tactic, but that still only leaves them with 4 strength, so I should still win the foray. Or, you know, be in on the foray, and indeed the foray is revealed when Cleveland seeds, so I was happy to see that and be guaranteed that food. So I can finish my tactic next turn. Cleveland decides to take the Code of Laws and play it. Sort of an interesting decision, because Cleveland is rather low on science right now, and Cleveland also decides to take the Theocracy. Now Cleveland, thanks to the foray, is able to rebuild their army, so that's definitely fortunate for Cleveland, and Cleveland is at least able to avoid corruption this turn. However, I'm not convinced by the Code of Laws and taking the Theocracy play myself. I mean, Cleveland already has the monarchy. Like I said, Cleveland is really low in science. I feel that instead of that, maybe taking some yellow cards, maybe taking the breakthrough to help with their science situation would have been preferable. However, Cleveland is now, the Theocracy will help Cleveland's strength push, and right now, obviously, Cleveland is threatening a ton of strength that me and Sazmar and I are going to have to respond to in some way. So on my turn, I have to decide basically whether I want to seed these cards. And I decided against seeding either of them. The Pestilence, I think, is more straightforward. I'm just really low on population right now. After the foray, I will have 1 more pop that I'll put into my army. But then at that point, I will be pretty much chock full. I will have no free population and no clear avenues to get a free population anytime soon. So while I think the Pestilence would also be rough for my opponents, it would be bad for me, and Sazmar at least has the food income to be able to survive the Pestilence relatively well. Cleveland has Barbarossa, so I think Pestilence is worse for me than for my opponents, so I definitely don't want to seed it. Could have Arms, you can definitely make an argument for seeding. The problem is, I will very likely not be stronger than Cleveland, at least not anytime soon. There is a reasonable chance of me being stronger than Sazmar, so I could seed it with the hopes that what will hit me, it will hit Sazmar even harder. However, there's also a chance, I mean, you know, I have Genghis Khan, Sazmar has Yanziska. It was a little hard to tell at the moment which of us would be stronger through H2. And also, you know, with me having no chance of winning it anyway, I would just be hit by a slightly worse than Sazmar. I felt that it was too risky and not worth seeding this either. So the only thing I do with my politics phase is offer the trade routes agreement to Sazmar. I wanted to use food as rocks because after my turn, I will have 1 food left that I will not be able to use after the age ends, so I thought that would be good for me. I decided to offer it to Sazmar. I thought that letting Cleveman use rocks as food would be too strong as Barbarossa. I thought there was at least a chance that Sazmar would accept this pact because, you know, Sazmar has the irrigations, so this could potentially let Sazmar increase the population a turn earlier or something, but Sazmar ends up rejecting it, unfortunately. I don't bother trying to offer it again because there's no reason for me to use rocks as food. Like I said, I think it would be way too risky to let Cleveland have the pact, so I decided to just abandon my politics phase after that. I do take the food from the foray, of course, to let me finish my heavy cavalry tactic this turn, thus putting me at 7 strength. And after finishing the Colossus, I'll be at 9 strength. Now, I am, of course, still vulnerable to an aggression from Cleveland. I am 1 sign short of playing the Warfare, unfortunately. So unless I draw a bonus card, Cleveland would be able to get an aggression against me. However, I still felt relatively safe because Sazmar is in an even more vulnerable position than me, despite having 1 extra military action. So I thought that even if Cleveland had an aggression in their hand, which, well, I guess they were pretty good odds of that, I thought that Cleveland would much more likely use the aggression against Sazmar than against me. So I didn't bother trying to, you know, destroy a building to make a 4th warrior or something to protect me against an aggression. Especially an age 1 aggression, that just felt like it definitely wouldn't be worth it. So instead I just decided to take, this time I do take the iron for 2 civil actions. Now I don't really have anything much better to do with my civil actions. I mean, I could have taken more yellow cards or something, but you know, now I have to take the iron. I'll be able to play it. Well, I'll be able to play it next. I'll be able to play it next turn and start upgrading. So, seemed like a good card to take. The question now is just to do with my final civil action, and I think the choice more or less comes down to the breakthrough and the engineering genius. There's an argument to be made for both. The engineering genius is a stronger card in general, and I also need rocks right now more than I need science because I upgraded my labs first. But I decided to go with the breakthrough mainly because of all these texts I have in my hand, and we can also see. In 2 turns, I'll have 12 total science, but that'll be 1 science short of playing all 3 of these texts. Whereas with the breakthrough, I will be able to play all 3 of them in 2 turns. And I think that consideration was decisive for me in taking the breakthrough, whereas the engineering genius has much less obvious utility. I mean, there's probably a pretty good chance that I'll get one of these Age 1 wonders, but it's still not clear when I'll be able to finish or something. And also, it should be noted, obviously, that Engineering Genius will be discarded after my turn, whereas Breakthrough won't be. So by taking the Breakthrough, I'm also denying it to Sazmar. So, I think it's pretty close, and I can see an argument for the Engineering Genius, but I decided on the Breakthrough. I keep the Call to Arms because it seemed like the event I would be most likely to seed. And I drew Rebellion, which is a seedable event. Sazmar upgrades 2 Iron Mines, takes an Alchemy, and a Rich Land. You know, having only Age 1 upgrade buildings like this instead of, say, winning by scientific method is generally something I try to avoid, but I have both played as and seen games where it's fine. So I'm honestly still not totally clear to myself on when having only Age 1 upgrade buildings is fine and when it's a little sketchy. So I have no comment on that. Other than that, this seems like a fine turn. Of course, Sazmar is vulnerable to an aggression, but they had no way to avoid that, it looks like. Yeah. And so Cleveland does have an aggression, but as I predicted, he used it against Sazmar, not me, because it's guaranteed against Sazmar, not guaranteed against me. So I think that does make sense on Cleveland's end. Obviously, very good for me, and Enslave would have been really bad for me. Anyway, Cleveland finally builds the second lab now, as well as an temple, which, again, usually not a good idea to directly build an AJ temple, but in Cleveland's case, they have the Acropolis, which makes it better, because it sort of gives them an extra science too, at least 1 time, if not more. As well as taking an urban growth, well, as well as taking 2 yellow cards. Cleveland could have considered trying to get Silk Road, I think. Silk Road seems like it would be pretty good for Cleveland, but it is also true that Cleveland is going to, well, I think Cleveland doesn't have any ways to spend resources right now, right? Cleveland will not be able to spend any, will not have food to put into the military next turn, and they don't have any current ways to upgrade their buildings. So Cleveland is going to be in danger of corruption next turn without taking a wonder. And so I think for that reason, Cleveland should have taken the Silk Road this turn, which also seems like a good wonder for them anyway, and, you know, not done one of these other things. H2 begins. My adjustments on the Colossus were the vast territory and 2 tactics, the Napoleonic Army tactic and the Classic Army tactic. Vast territory, pretty good draw for a potential Suez Canal, so I didn't want to seed it yet. So I decided to seed the Rebellion instead, because I'm going to build the Bread and Circuses this turn anyway. I reveal Confucius event. So, well, okay. I think 3 of my actions are pretty set here. I'll talk about the wonder in a bit, but obviously I'm building I'm building the Bread and Circuses in order to get out of Uprising and for the Rebellion that I seeded, but yeah, I seeded the Rebellion because I knew I was doing this to get out of Uprising. And with my 3rd civil action, I play the Warfare. No reason to play the Iron when I don't have the racks to upgrade this turn. The Warfare also enables me to defend against Cleveland. Well, I was already defending against Cleveland, but obviously, you know, extra military action, really nice to have starting in H2. So I think these 3 civil actions are pretty set. The question is only which wonder to pick. And the reason that I took Silk Road over Universalis and Great Wall, I think an argument can be made for any of them, frankly. I think they all could be very good in my position. The main reason I took the Silk Road over these 2 is because I'm going to be upgrading my Iron Mines late, right? I'm only going to start upgrading them in H2. And so I'm going to be a little bit short on resources. And so for that reason, the Silk Road costing fewer resources seemed better. Obviously, it cost one more civil action, but I, you know, have the Code of Laws, so that felt like a reasonable price to pay. I definitely, like I said, though, think that there's a strong case to be made for Universalis or Great Wall. So I'm not married to this pick. I think they all have strengths and weaknesses. It is true that the Suez is going to be discarded on my turn, so taking one of these would deny the other to Sasmer. However, I think both of these are quite very good for Sasmer, maybe about equally good, so I didn't really see a reason to deny one of them when Sasmer could just take the other. This discard decision, though, I have to talk a little bit about. I spent a long time on it because I really wanted 4 cards. One of that bonus card that I discarded, as well as these 3, the Vast for the Suez Canal, and also, you know, I have Colossus, so I'd like to be able to maybe potentially seed it too. As well as these 2 tactics, because I wasn't sure yet which one I wanted to do. Obviously, the Classic Army doesn't require cannons, whereas the Napoleonic Army does. But the Napoleonic Army is just a stronger, I would say, like a significantly stronger tactic. It's maybe the best H2 tactic. If you have the text for it, I think it's the best H2 tactic. Well, okay, that's not true, right? Because there's also mobile artillery and fortifications. So I shouldn't have said that, but it's definitely like a stronger, like I would say a tier above the Classic Army in terms of H2 tactics. However, in retrospect, I think I should have just committed to one right now, and I think I probably should have just committed to the Classic Army because while the Napoleonic Army requiring the artillery is a pretty strong factor, and I think, you know, when the only tactic you draw is the Napoleonic Army, for example, then, like, you really want the cannons, obviously, because that could be the tactic. But, like, the Classic Army not requiring cannons is, like, a really major point in its favor. So I think that, and especially for me in my situation where, I mean, I should mention another reason that I do like Genghis is he very often lets you do what I'm doing here, which is not take any Age 1 military techs and just get Age 2 military techs. So that's very nice. But that also means that I don't have any military techs yet. And in this situation where I have no military techs, it's pretty ambitious, I think, to aim for getting all 3. So I think I should have just discarded the Napoleonic Army this turn, kept the bonus cards. That was a mistake. I draw a Civil Unrest, a Hussars, another tactic, and a raid. Sasmer plays that patriotism in order to build a knight, play a medieval army, and Sazmar also disbands a warrior to build a second knight to get a second army going. This gives Sazmar 8 strength, which is enough to threaten to defend an aggression from Cleveland if Sazmar had 2 bonus cards. So this is a pretty substantial cost, obviously disbanding the warrior, but I understand the logic behind it. And that's all that Sazmar can do. So Sazmar doesn't even take either of those wonders. Cleveland Seas reveals the Crusades that I had seeded. At least I am not the weakest, so it doesn't hit me. Cleveland decides to take the St. Peter's Basilica. I think that's definitely good, because Cleveland really needs a way to spend their rocks. I think Great Wall or Universalis would have been substantially better, though, even in Cleveland's position. So, anyway, water under the bridge. We can see here that Cleveland taking the Theocracy does at least provide an immediate benefit this turn, because it means Cleveland is able to get out of Uprising. So that should be needed as a justification for that Theocracy play a few turns ago. And they're able to get out of Corruption by building 2 stages of the St. Peter's Basilica, so this is a good turn, I think. I do see the civil unrest. I'm not weakest. I wanted to seed. There's also a colony in the deck that I know about that I wanted to potentially reveal on my turn. So yeah, and I do reveal that colony. I only bid 2 for it though. I mean, I discarded that bonus card, so a little bit coming back to bite me. On the other hand, I probably didn't want to win this colony anyway, because I wouldn't have had a way to rebuild that warrior. So I think I mainly bid 2 to, again, keep Sazmar honest, make sure Sazmar couldn't win with just, if I had passed, then, one of my opponents could have won it for much cheaper. So, wanted to keep Sazmar honest a little bit. And if I had won it for 1 warrior, even though, obviously, that probably would have required me to destroy a mine to rebuild the tactic, maybe. Well, actually, no, it would have been fine because I had the Hussars. So, because I had the Hussars tactic, I was very confident in, bidding for that colony, but unfortunately I was only able to bid 2. This turn, 3 civil actions I think are pretty clear. I built 1 stage of the Silk Road to be able to use the Silk Road bonus with the breakthrough, and then upgrade one of my mines. I could have taken, without doing all 3 of those things, I could have taken one of these cards for 3 civil actions, but there are also some very strong cards to take for 2 civil actions. I thought this was still worth it. The question more is which of these cards to take for 2 civil actions, and I think an argument could be made for any of them, frankly. They're all going their own ways. Newton, obviously, a very strong leader in general. Cannons I could use for my Napoleonic army tactic. Selective breeding, I'm going to want relatively soon, especially when I finish upgrading my mines and just in general to get more population. And architecture could be useful for Silk Road and for urban buildings too, obviously. So, I think taking any one of these cards, like I said, could be justified. In the end, though, I decided for the selective breeding, and there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, I think it's the card that will be most immediately beneficial to me, because I really need population. That's kind of my major weakness right now. Second of all, the cannons, well, it could be useful for the Napoleonic army tactic. I currently have two tactics in my hand that don't need a cannon tech. And so with that in mind, I decided that I was just going to discard this Napoleonic army anyway. So I saw no reason to take the cannon. Newton, strong leader, but there are other strong leaders, even strong leaders on the road. Darwin and Nobel, I think, could both be good options for me. So I also didn't see a need to take Newton for 2 civil actions when, Nobel and Darwin, I would say, would be maybe as good as him. Maybe Newton would be a bit better, but at least I would still be able to get probably one of these for 1 civil action next turn, which might be better than Newton for 2 civil actions, and definitely better to take one of these, I think, with selective breeding. And architecture, I think, good tech, but just, worse in general than selective breeding. Now, obviously there are 2 copies of selective breeding. Sazmar is already upgraded into irrigation, so they're very likely not going to take the second. So even if I don't take this one, I will be able to get the second copy. Problem is I don't know when the second copy will appear. Cleveland, I think, would absolutely take that second copy if I leave it to them. Cleveland would absolutely take this copy of selective breeding if I leave it to them. So, if I don't take the selective breeding, then I might be waiting potentially till the end of the age to get it. And I felt that my position, I forgot to talk about people's relative positions earlier at the beginning of age 2, but I would say that they're looking about even with Sazmer and I having more of an economy, but Cleveman having more strength. But I felt that I was maybe a bit in the best position because I was sort of in the middle, where Cleveman has a lot of strength, but sacrificed the economy. Sazmer has more economy, but sacrificed the strength. And I felt like I was basically in the middle, which felt nice. So I thought that there was no reason for me to, like, take a big risk. And if the second copy of Selective Breeding would only appear, like, at the end of the age, that might be game-losing for me, potentially. And so for that reason, I wanted to just make sure I got it in my hand now, even though there's an argument to be made for these other cards, like I said. So I decided to go to the discard, then I'll put, like, an enemy tactic, because I passed up the cannons, as well as the aggression. Keeping these two, I wasn't sure which one I would use yet. And I drew a National Pride, a Spy, and an International Negotiations. Sazmer doesn't seed, instead they rebuild that knight to get more strength up, finish upgrading their mines, and they decide to take a strategy and the reserves. They decide to take the reserves over upgrading the mine, over upgrading the farm. It is true that they don't need to upgrade the farm this turn to increase the population. It is notable to me, however, that they took the reserves over the cannon. I think that with Sazmer not having drawn any H2 cards yet, that the cannon could definitely... Well, I think they drew one card and it was the bonus card. No. Yeah, so Sazmer has not drawn any H2 cards yet, so they don't know which tactic they'll get, and they may draw a cannon artillery tactic that they would really want the cannon for. So I think that unless you already have, like, a tactic in hand that doesn't need cannons like I do, passing up cannon for one civil action is very rarely right, in my opinion, and I think it's definitely not right to take reserves instead. H1 reserves. Cleveland Seas reveals the rebellion that I seeded. It doesn't hit anyone, though. Cleveland finishes their winter, takes the cannon that Sazmer didn't, as well as a breakthrough to help play these techs in their hand. This seems like a good turn to Cleveland. However, it does mean that they pass up any of these leaders. Or do they? Yeah. Oh yeah, Cleveland ends up floating a civil action because they don't have enough science to play any of these cards. I think they did have the science to play Switzerland, but didn't want to. I think that Cleveland should have taken one of these leaders instead. Cleveland could have taken Newton or Darwin, elected them, and then taken the breakthrough, right? Probably, I mean, with St. Peter's, actually, Darwin is fine, so... but Newton, obviously, is also very strong, even though he's currently wouldn't give any science. He would at least give civil actions, and would give science later, once Cleveland hopefully gets scientific methods, so... I think, my point is, I think either Newton or Darwin could be good for Cleveland and would be justifiable, but I really think Cleveland should have picked one of them now that they're out of food, so Barbarossa isn't doing anything for them. Anyways, my turn decided to see that National Pride. It probably, I probably wouldn't win it, but, you know, I do at least get culture from seeing it, and obviously reveal a card on my turn while I'm not weakest. I end up revealing the Uncertain Borders, which doesn't hit me. So this was an interesting turn because I have this Conmon that appeared on the road that I definitely want. My major weakness right now, along with my population, is not having a government. So getting this relatively early government and the better one, I didn't have to take much to take. But the problem is that I am one science short of playing the Constitutional Monarchy. Now, it's possible that Cleveland, having been Confucius, that maybe this final event that Cleveland seeded was a Confucius event. But obviously I don't know that. And so what that means is, in my current situation, I don't know whether I'll be able to play the Conmon next turn. But I am able to fix that if I elect either Newton or Nobel. Newton obviously would give me more civil actions, but Nobel would give me the strength. And that would be nice, because you'll note... I'll discuss it after I show my turn, which is taking and electing Nobel. So like I said, the advantage of electing Nobel now is it lets me for sure play the Conmon next turn, which seemed very strong, obviously, getting the government going a turn earlier. The problem is, of course, that I am not able to defend, having replaced Genghis Khan. Even if I copy the fighting band tactic, I would still not be one strength short of being certain to defend. However, so I did debate on whether or not this risk was worth it, and in the end, I decided that it was. part of it is because of how Cleveland played. I played against Cleveland in the 4-player games, and Cleveland pushed strength pretty hard in at least one of those 4-player games, if not both. But one thing I noticed is that Cleveland didn't take a lot of risks with their aggressions. There was, in at least one of those games, maybe in both, but definitely at least in one, I bluffed having a defense card against Cleveland, and Cleveland didn't call my bluff. So, for that reason, I felt pretty sure that Cleveland probably wouldn't call my bluff in this game either. Obviously, you can never know for sure. But that was my suspicion. And I even have a chance, to draw a bonus card this turn anyway. And so, while it is a risk, I decided that the benefits of potentially getting my government going a turn earlier were worth the risk. Now, I could have elected Newton instead, but with Newton I would have been 7 strength behind Cleveland instead of 5, and 7 would not be enough to defend even with 1 bonus card. Now, I could have elected Newton and copied the Fighting Bane tactic. I think that's actually not something I considered, but I should have. And so then, by copying the Fighting Bane tactic, I would have bluffed being able to defend. However, I also would have missed 2 card draws. And while I do have a tactic in hand, I mean, getting those 2 extra draws obviously gives me a higher chance of drawing the bonus card in case Cleveland does try the aggression. As well as just in general, missing draws isn't great. And I think in my position, I'm probably not getting journalism or scientific methods. And so, Nobel is giving me 1 extra science than Newton would. Newton giving me the extra civil actions is definitely nice, but I will have 7 civil actions with the Kanmon plus the Code of Laws. So getting extra civil actions with Newton, while obviously never bad, didn't feel too necessary, while as the extra strength from Nobel in order to compete more with Cleveland seemed more useful in my position. And the Nobel Prizes, even after losing Nobel, I will at least have the Silk Road going to help me with science. My opponents could be on scientific methods too, so it's hard to tell for sure right now who will be in a better position for the Nobel Prizes, but I at least have, they could potentially also benefit me. Especially since my opponents have culture protection and I don't. So the Nobel Prizes will be one way for me to keep up against them in culture in H3. But the major reason I think Nobel is probably better than Newton here is the strength. Another reason to take Nobel is also that Newton as well as Darwin will be discarded after my turn. So Sasmer potentially could have taken Nobel if I hadn't. And Nobel I think would also be quite good for Sasmer. And so this is a denial to Sasmer, which is a relevant factor. Anyway, with my remaining civil actions, I decide to just work on my civilization. The patriotism could, while you always want to consider taking yellow cards with Silk Road, I don't have an immediately obvious use for the urban growth. I probably would not use it for a number of turns. And the patriotism, I could definitely use. The patriotism is especially good, obviously, with Silk Road, because it gives you 2 military actions. On the other hand, I will have 5 military actions going with the Kanmon plus the Warfare. So I just felt that, and again, the patriotism I'm not going to be able to use probably. I'm not going to be able to use next turn anyway. And so for those reasons, I decided if I'm not going to be able to use them next turn anyway, I might as well just work on my civilization, and expect to get hopefully better cards next turn. I keep those 2 tactics. I discard the strength event because it seemed risky. Keep the vast territory, again in case of Suez and stuff like that. I draw freedom of movement as well as 2 packs. One of it, the scientific cooperation, is definitely an interesting one. Sasmer Snap takes the scientific method for 3 civil actions, and I think, upgrades 1. High cost to pay, but I think it's definitely justifiable. Cleveland also wants the scientific method, obviously, and Sasmer really needs to get some science going. Sasmer did already have the alchemy, but it's getting into the middle of H2 already, so even though this is a cost of civil actions, and I think upgrading alchemies would also have been a defensible play, this is a defensible play too. Cleveland thankfully doesn't call my bluff. So they see. They do reveal a Confucius event though, so I didn't have to play my leader this turn to get my government, but obviously I didn't know that when I took my turn. Anyway, Cleveland replaces their Age 1 government with a different Age 1 government, which is generally not something you want to do, but it's also, Cleveland doesn't need the happy face from the theocracy anymore, and they do have Acropolis as well, which makes doing this kind of play at least less taxing. And they have a fair amount of science saved up as well. And they're able to take some yellow cards to get these cool upgrades going quicker. This does, however, require them to take corruption. I think they only had 5 rocks last turn, though, so they did not have a way around that. I decided to offer the scientific cooperation. The freedom of movement, you know, could be suitable, but I think I don't have an obvious use for it at the present point in time, whereas the scientific cooperation, obviously, will be immediately useful for me, so I thought that it was worth at least trying to see if someone accepted it. You know, Sazmar already has scientific methods going, Cleveland doesn't. Even though there is a scientific method on the row, you know, Cleveland might want to do cool upgrades first, so I thought that it was more likely that Sazmar would accept the pact. And indeed they did, so that's obviously great. Very powerful when you can get it going. I decided to finish my iron upgrades first. I don't need to finish the Silk Road yet. I'm not really, now that I have the Kanman, I am safe from an aggression from Cleveland, so I didn't see a need to get more population next turn either. Cleveland could get up to 15 strength, potentially, but if Cleveland didn't aggress me last turn when I was bluffing a defense card, they probably won't aggress me next turn either. So that was why I decided to prioritize the mine upgrade over the farm upgrade. Also, I think I didn't have enough rocks to upgrade both farms anyway, so I'd take the efficient upgrade. Obviously, yellow card with Silk Road will be immediately useful next turn with selective breeding upgrades, so it seems strong. But I didn't want to take too many cards to clog up my hand, and, you know, I wanted to make sure to finish the Silk Road next turn too, so I decided to spend 2 more civil actions building more of the Silk Road. There is 1 copy of architecture left, so maybe I could wait for the architecture to finish it as well, but I think it's probably better to get it out of the way. If I hadn't done it, I guess we'll talk about it in a bit, because I think the alternative to building these 2 would have been to take all 3 of these yellow cards. If I were to take all 3 of these yellow cards, now the revolutionary idea I could play whenever, but it would still kind of be clogging up my hand a little bit, and also just using a lot of civil actions on taking cards. So I think it's just generally safer to be a bit more efficient with those civil actions. The other reason... So the question now is which of these cards to take, and I think the other thing I worked on is I decided that I'd rather just take the reserves and the frugality and just leave the revolutionary idea. Now, the revolutionary idea, obviously, with the Silk Road and with me having the Scientific Cooperation Pact, would be a good card to take, but it's a pretty significant civil action cost as well. 2 to take, 1 more to play, and, you know, while giving me 5 science, that's a fair amount, I also felt like I was kind of pretty good in science. I mean, I have Nobel, I'm gonna have Silk Road going soon. You know, Sazmar, maybe we'll take the revolutionary idea, but Sazmar also has a lot of stuff to do. Sazmar is gonna want a government form, they're gonna want to play the strategy, so I didn't really feel like Sazmar was likely to, like, play a bunch of text on me or anything like that. And so I just felt that, like, spending 3 civil actions total on this revolutionary idea wasn't that great. I think it still would have been fine to take instead of these 2 stages of the Silk Road, but I also wanted to build these stages, you know, just in case there was a window that appeared on the road that I might want to take. You know, I think especially Ocean Liner Service and Harvard College could potentially be very good for me. So I'm pretty satisfied with this turn overall. Oh, but I do decide to adopt the fighting band. I have 2 extra military actions to use, so it doesn't cost me any draws to adopt this tactic, so I saw no reason not to. Oh yeah, and I forgot, because I adopt this tactic, that means that I will probably be guaranteed to defend against Cleveland next turn as well. I still don't draw any bonus cards. I draw 2 colonies as well as a war over tech. Sazmar increases the population, is able to get Bach. I think we saw in previous 4-player games too that Sazmar's style is to push culture and military as much as they can. So that fits with that. Sazmar is able to get both Bach and Opera for 1 civil action, notably. That doesn't mean they have to build a warrior and then place a conquistador's tactic to at least be able to threaten defending with one bonus card. Though, this does mean that Sasmar was missing one civil action to play the strategy, unfortunately. Anyway, Cleveland Seeds reveals cultural influence. That gives me precisely 0 culture, unfortunately. Cleveland is able to upgrade 2 coal mines, takes Maria, get a strong leader to have, and 3-player, and Cleveland doesn't need Robespierre, especially with Cropless, so that makes sense. And with the final sub action, they take that scientific method, best tech for them for sure, so this turn makes a lot of sense. I'd like to seed the historic territory. I mean, I'm not weakest, so, you know, generally, you know, I like seeding. The freedom of movement, again, I didn't see an obvious way, you know. Maybe I could have seeded the freedom of movement with the expectation to move one of these warriors off, but I thought that, you know, seeding a colony with these warriors could also potentially be good. Now, on the other hand, I don't have any bonus cards, but on the other hand, as we'll see, I'm planning on taking the navigation. So I think because I'm planning on taking the navigation, that was decisive for me in seeding the colony. But I seeded the less value colony, probably, in case I didn't win it. I reveal Cold War, definitely very good event to see when I am on scientific cooperation. I'm able to upgrade 2 farms with the efficient upgrade. So the question now is what to spend my 4 remaining civil actions on. One of them is pretty obvious. I have just enough rocks left to finish Silk Road. So now the only question, now I have 3 civil actions left to spend, and I think I do make a mistake here because I take the opera. I think my logic behind the opera was, you know, there's Hollywood in the deck, there's Fleming, maybe it'll be useful for me, but I think that was my logic, but I'm not sure. I mean, you can already tell that feels kind of flimsy to me, even as I say it. You know, I don't have the architecture or anything, and I'm only on 6 rocks, so taking this opera feels, in retrospect, like a pretty big mistake, especially since I had another very good option, which was playing the navigation this turn. I think playing the navigation wouldn't have made me strongest, but, you know, one of my opponents definitely, well, I think Cleveland's been the only one that seeded, but Cleveland definitely could have seeded a colony that playing the navigation this turn would help me bet on. So, I think that playing the navigation this turn definitely would be much stronger than just taking this opera where I don't know whether or if I'll even ever build any operas. So this was a pretty significant mistake on my end. I discard the pact that I'm not going to offer, as well as the war that was looking pretty unlikely. You know, I'm not going to be in a position to get a war going until maybe mid-age 3, and at that point I'd rather get some wars on culture if possible. I draw an Iconic Closet, an always interesting event. There's also a mobile artillery that I'm likely not going to use, as well as a plunder. So as my seed, instead they take the Kanman, play a strategy, upgrade the second lab, take the ocean liner service. This seems like a good turn from them. Just notice though that Sasmar played back that previous turn, and now there's 2 turns straight where they haven't even played the opera card. So I think Sasmar should have kept Ziska for a couple more turns instead, and instead of, you know, playing Bach and doing their military thing, could have like played the strategy or something last turn. This does leave me weakest though. Thankfully, Cleveland doesn't see it. Instead, they take the selective breeding, elect Maria, upgrade the selective breeding for Maria, take an urban growth versus scientific method, and take an engineering genius, potentially aiming for the Suez Canal, maybe. So, overall, putting it in obvious. Now, the weakness of this play is that it does mean that this urban growth 1 is going to be discarded before Cleveland can use it. So maybe for that reason, Cleveland should have upgraded the scientific method this turn with this urban growth instead of the farm. It's my turn. I decide to go ahead and seed, even though I'm weakest. I seeded... What was that card? Oh, it was the other colony. Yeah, I decided that because I have this navigation, I wanted the other colony to be in the deck. And So I was willing to risk getting hit by a strength event. I had already seen at least one strength event, the international negotiations as well. Definitely getting hit by another would be bad, so this was a kind of a risky seed, but I wanted the colony in the deck. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, though. But instead I reveal an autonomous territory, but this is also kind of a punish because it reveals a colony before I'm able to play that navigation. Again, I should have just played the navigation last turn. Anyway, because of that mistake, I am not able to win it. Instead, Sazma wins it for only 6. I wasn't willing to put too much into it because I would have been vulnerable to aggressions from Cleveland. So, Sazma is able to win it with only a knight and 2 bonus cards, so that's definitely quite good for Sazma. I'll explain why I built this arena later. Instead, you can see I take the Rifleman and the Cavalryman. You know, I need these 2 techs for my classic army. I am able to upgrade one warrior to Rifleman this turn, as well as play the navigation, which makes me strongest. And we can see the reason why I built an arena, even though I didn't need it last turn. Okay, actually, yeah, I had to build it because when the age, if I hadn't built it, then I would have an unhappy worker after my turn when the age ends, and I had a what's it called? A civil something. Sorry. I had previously seeded the civil unrest. So I think actually knowing the civil unrest was in the deck was also a reason why I seeded, because I would have preferred to get the civil unrest out, so I wouldn't have had to build this arena yet. But it wasn't revealed, so if I didn't build this arena, I would have gotten hit by the civil unrest, and that's why I did it. I also didn't really, unfortunately, doing all this does mean that I have to pass up all of these wonders. I actually forgot to mention last turn. Last turn I had an opportunity to take the Ocean Liner Service, yeah, instead of what I did instead, which was I could have skipped one farm upgrade and not taking these cards to take the Ocean Liner Service the previous turn. And obviously I skipped these ones this turn. I guess it's fine just to discuss that in general, though. I think that, well, obviously, like, Ocean Liner Service, Harvard College, even maybe the Suez Canal with the vast territory, those would all be pretty strong wonders. The problem is my rocks are pretty pressed right now, because I was still just on 3 warriors. I had not really upgraded my military at all this game yet. And in order to get this classic army going eventually, I'm going to need to build 2 more cavalrymen as well as upgrade this warrior. So that's going to be, after already spending all my rocks this turn, that's going to be 5, 10, 13 more rocks just to get 1 army going, much less more. So while I could have, like I said, taken the Ocean Liner Service last turn and then potentially even finished it this turn with my reserves, I thought that my rocks were too pressed right now for me to be spending them on a wonder. That with me being able to spend them on military instead, getting a classic army tactic going felt more important than putting a bunch of civil actions and rocks into a wonder. So that's why I didn't take any H2 wonders, even though they're all pretty strong. Discarded the tactic I won't use, drew a Politics of Strength, the Ravages of Time, and a War of Attack. Both of those are potential seedable impacts for me. Age 3 begins. My Colossus draws are Armed Intervention, Impact of Strength, and a bonus card. Sazma finishes the Ocean Liner Service, plays Kanman, takes reserves, as well as Sazma does end up at least getting the 2nd copy of Cannon for 1 civil action, so passing up the 1st copy ended up working out for them. As well as an architecture, this maybe is a little ambitious, but they are on scientific cooperation, and obviously the architecture will be good with those operas, so they still haven't found an opportunity to build operas yet, though. Okay, now with H3 beginning, I think we can take a look at everyone's relative positions. So in culture terms, Cleveland is currently in the lead, but not by that much, only by about 15. Again, like, it would have been more, Genghis Khan, I think, ended up giving me maybe 12 culture, so definitely helped me keep on pace with Cleveland and Sazma culture-wise. Science production, obviously, I'm significantly in the lead with having more production, more science on hand, as well as that scientific cooperation pack going. Block income looks about even. Cleveland will have more soon, but obviously Cleveland will have delayed the mine upgrade, so that kind of balances out. Farm income is also about even. Cleveland's Yellow Bank situation is better than mine. Sasmer has the Ocean Liner service, which is a significant strength for them. Sasmer and I have the advantage in terms of civil and military actions. But Sasmer has some happy face issues to deal with. So, but strength-wise, I'm currently strongest by a little bit, and Sasmer is pretty decidedly weakest. Looking at it, I would say that there's no one in a dominant position or anything like that. Cleveland is in the culture lead, but they will need to work, especially in the science income. They do have the scientific methods. Maybe they'll get a computer soon or something, but they definitely need to have some economy issues that they need to work on. Sasmer's economy is fine, especially with the Ocean Liner service. And they'll be able to get some culture going soon with Bach. Their issue, of course, is their military, where they're currently weakest, and they have no obvious way to get stronger soon. The riflemen, but from the way they played, they could have taken riflemen, but valued the Ocean Liner service instead. But that does mean riflemen will be discarded before their turn, unfortunately. So they might have some struggles with strength for that reason. But on the other hand, there is the modern infantry, so maybe Sasmer was fine not taking the riflemen because they figured they could just get the modern infantry instead. Still, though, they won't be able to play the modern infantry at least next turn, so they might have some strength issues. As for me, I think that my economy situation and my strength situation are both looking pretty good. My cultural situation is also looking fine, a bit weaker than my opponents, especially when Sasmer gets operas going, but still fine. So I felt that I was probably in the most balanced position among all my opponents in terms of strength and economy, while not being too far behind in culture. So I felt pretty good against my position. Probably you could say I'm doing the best right now, but again, I wouldn't say it's like overwhelming or anything. I don't think anyone's position is hopeless or anything like that. Definitely not. So definitely H3 could be anyone's game. Cleveland Siege reveals that civil unrest that I mentioned, costing Sasmer 8 culture, pretty significant, as well as the blue token. Cleveland finally gets those lava upgrades going, takes the rifleman as well as a cavalryman. Unfortunately, doing this does mean they can't upgrade their second, another coal mine, which I think is a pretty significant cost. Probably Cleveland should have done that instead of taking this cavalryman, or maybe the rifleman. I don't know Cleveland's tactic situation, though, obviously. That also means they're in corruption, so they basically lose, they lose a lot of rocks by not upgrading this mine this turn. As for my turn, eagle-eyed viewers might see a certain combo of cards on the row, but before we get into that, let's see what happens when I seed. I decide to seed the Iconoclasm because of that combo of cards in the row. Specifically, we have Bill Gates and computers. I'll pause a bit to talk about Bill Gates. I think Bill Gates might be my least favorite card in the game, frankly, because I feel that he's extremely swingy. I think when you get him, mid to late age 3, I think he's fine. Like, he's good, but, hardly overwhelming or anything. But in a situation like this, where you get him and computers at the beginning of age 3, literally my first turn in age 3, I'm able to take both. I'm not able to build computers this turn, but I am able to take both of the cards in my hands, and I'm going to get computers next turn. Bill Gates can just single-handedly win someone the game. Like I said, I'm already arguably in the best position among my opponents. Getting an early Bill Gates computers, though, will turn that into, I think, like a decisive, significant advantage over my opponents. So, like I said, that's why I don't like Bill Gates. I feel that, like, he's way too luck dependent of when he shows up on the row. But I'm definitely going to take advantage of him when I can. And so, like I said, I wanted to elect him because I was planning on taking Bill Gates this turn. I felt that it was just too good getting that Iconoclasm in the very next event deck, electing Bill Gates this turn, while both of my opponents are not only on H2 leaders, but very strong H2 leaders for their situations. Just felt way too powerful. At least he's giving me an extra 2 rocks this turn, while costing me 2 science, but the rocks are probably better for me than the science right now, even with the Nobel Prizes. With my last civil action, I take the reserves. You know, even with Bill Gates, you know, I'm gonna be spending a fair amount of rocks building computers anyway, so I thought the reserves could definitely be helpful. More helpful than the breakthrough. I'm gonna have more than enough science very soon. And I can get out of corruption by upgrading one warrior to rifleman. Now, I could have upgraded the second one, too, to become stronger than Cleveman. But, first of all, I knew that none of the cards that I had seeded in this event deck were strength events. And Cleveman didn't feel... I mean, Cleveman maybe didn't really have an opportunity to build with strength, but Cleveman wasn't making a huge effort to build strength either. But the main reason I wanted to keep this warrior around is because I have those 2 colonies in deck. And I have this bonus card as well as, obviously, the navigation. So I felt that there was a pretty decent chance that I could win one of those colonies with just a warrior. So I wanted to keep the warrior around for increased flexibility in winning colonies. I decided to keep the vast, keep the vast colony as well as the impacted drew. I basically kept all the events that I thought I was reasonably likely to seed. And I drew 2 wars as well as a modern army. So this was certainly an indication. I think, you know, when you get early bookcase computers, you can kind of do whatever you want. And it's just based on what the card row is and what you draw. And with me drawing 2 wars, that's a pretty clear indication of which direction I should go in this game. Cleveland decides to finally build an opera. Unfortunately, isn't able to build it with architecture. Actually, 2 operas, but again, without architecture. So that's a little unfortunate. They are obviously able to get a bunch of culture protection going with it, though. They take the modern infantry for strength purposes as well as a patriotism. So we can see now Cleveland's strategy: get culture protection going with these operas and protect themselves as best they can. Reasonable strategy. Cleveland Seeds reveals the strategic territory. I had not seeded this one, right? I was able to win it. I forget exactly how much I bid, but I was able to win it with a bid of 9. Unfortunately, I did end up, you know, putting in 10 points when I only needed 9, but that's how it goes sometimes. At least it only cost me 1 unit. And the 5 cards I drew off of it were another Modern Army tactic, 3 aggressions, as well as an impact of happiness. Maybe... in retrospect, I shouldn't have bid so much into it because I knew there were 2 more colonies coming that were probably better for me. You know, I already had 2 wars. You know, maybe I was kind of looking for a different tactic, but the only other tactic I really could have been looking for better than this modern army for me would be shock troops. So with me already having 2 wars, maybe I should have bid less on that colony and prepared more for the developed territory and the historic territory. Anyway, Cleveland finishes upgrading the mine and the farm, takes a democracy and a pro sports. You know, pro sports with St. Peter's Basilica, maybe not necessary, but on the other hand, it is a way to get some strength without spending military actions, which is kind of one of their biggest current problems. It's my turn. I see that was, yeah, that was the, what's it called? The strongest player draws 5 military cards one. I figured that, with me having Bill Gates, I felt pretty confident that I would be able to be strongest and win that card. We see another territory super that I don't see, the wealthy territory. Unfortunately, I drew no bonus cards off of the strategic territory, so I was only able to build 7, and Cleveland was able to win it, while only spending 1 night on it, which is pretty good. This one I decided to just get some bookcase going, build a 3rd lab directly. You know, just seems good. You know, maybe I could try being on 2 labs, but I mean, I have a lot of, you know, farm income, so I felt like, you know, it just seemed better to get 3 computers as soon as possible. I have 4 civil actions left, and I think the main question there is whether to take the Manhattan Project or the Air Forces. Both are definitely extremely strong for me, so it's a question of which one to take. Hard decision. In the end, I went with the Air Forces. I think the Air Forces just represents more strength overall, and it's also a card I'm denying to one of my opponents, especially since, you know, I'm obviously setting up for wars right now, and I don't know when the second copy of Air Forces might be out, so if I let one of my opponents have it, and I try to war someone without Air Forces, even with the Manhattan Project, might start getting a little hairy. So that's why I went with Air Forces, and with my last level action, I take the efficient upgrade, which will be directly useful to me next turn with my lab upgrades. As for the cards I keep, I obviously wanted to keep both of my wars. The question was just the remaining 3 cards I wanted to keep. And I think it kind of came down to, I wanted to keep the Impact of Strength too, for sure. And I also wanted to keep the Ravages of Time. You know, I don't really need the Colossus anymore. Whereas my opponents, Wonders, especially the Pyramids, seemed better. And I ended up keeping those as well as a potential aggression, just, you know, in case you never know. Yeah, I discarded the colony. You know, there's 2 colonies coming. You know, by the time the colony comes out, it probably wouldn't be that useful for me anyway. And I'm also trying to set up for wars. I think that in retrospect, I probably should have kept the modern army. You know, there's 2 copies of rockets. Both of my opponents have cannons. I should be able to get one of those rockets. It's true that I don't know when it'll come out. Maybe it'll come out late. But I think at least keeping the option of the modern army would have been better. And instead letting go of maybe the Ravages of Time, or I guess probably the Plunder. You know, I could have maybe expected to draw another aggression instead. So, yeah, I think I should have kept the modern army over the Plunder. That was a mistake. I draw 2 impacts, government and colonies, as well as another aggression. Occupy. Cleveland Seeds reveals my Iconoclasm. Happy to see that get revealed sooner rather than later. Sazmar is at least able to immediately replace Bach, albeit with a leader that gives him that somewhat worse than me, although, I mean, Fleming obviously has the advantage of seeing military cards, so, you know, maybe as good as Bach, or slightly better, but at least costs him civil action. Able to upgrade, to build 1 modern infantry with the patriotism, as well as knights to get a little bit of strengthening. That actually makes Sazmar the strongest, and takes pro sports to fix the happiness situation. So this seems like a good turn from Sazmar. Oh yeah, they're able to adopt the classic army, and we'll be able to get a full one next turn. Cleveland decides to do a democracy revolution, which seems pretty good for them in this situation. They also build a warrior, notably, maybe a sign that, well, I know it's not feeding with movement because I discarded that. Maybe they're building this warrior for potential colonies or something. So my turn to see that Impact of Strength. It was kind of a close decision between that and the Ravages, but I felt that I was going to start doing wars pretty soon, as in next turn. And so my political phases are going to be used up the next 2 turns, most likely with wars, meaning I only have 1 left to go after that. So I felt it made more sense to see the Impact of Strength, which I definitely wanted to do, and, you know, hope to get another strong impact to see in my final turn. And then I reveal historic territory. Fortunately, having drawn no bonus cards, I wasn't willing to bid too much into it. Sazmar ends up winning it. At least it costs Sazmar 2 units, which will limit their strength potential a bit. Hopefully. Of course, the happy faces are directly immediately useful for Sazmar, so I understand wanting to put a lot into it. Anyway, I finished upgrading my lab to computers, and I am able to build a cavalryman 2 to become the strongest. This military theory I was, you know, definitely willing to take. I mean, I will certainly have enough science. I mean, I already have the warfare, but getting 2 more military actions and 4 more strength can never be bad. Will definitely, and as we'll see, there's actually 2 military actions will indeed be very useful for me as the game goes on. So definitely pretty fortunate of me to get access to this military theory. This also gives me a Nobel Prize. I should have mentioned that. Yeah, last turn, I unfortunately wasn't able to win a Nobel Prize. Everything else I did on my turn, you know, namely, you know, building the lab, taking the Air Forces and the efficient upgrade seemed more important. But this turn, I was able to get that Nobel Prize pretty smoothly, so that was nice. I popped because I didn't, you know, passing up a revolutionary idea for 1 civil action is not something you normally do, but I have so much science right now that it really felt unnecessary to me. So that's kind of interesting. It's a game where the one civil action age 3 revolution idea, not too good. And I mean, look, I have 27 science, so it really is not important. I am fortunate in my draws, though. Not only I draw a third war, which I, probably won't use, but, maybe I'll be able to. But more importantly, I draw the shock troops, the only age 3 tactic that doesn't require artillery. So that was definitely fortunate. Sazmer, let's see, looks at Cleveland's cards. Sazmer chooses to take tanks, patriotism, and revolutionary idea, so Sazmer clearly setting up to try to defend as much as they can. Builds the knights as well as the warriors to get the tactic going again. And also takes the reserve. And also takes the reserves. And engineering, because there's nothing better to do with that last civil action. Makes think this turn from Sazmer makes sense. Cleveland takes Einstein for 3 civil actions. Einstein is the best leader for them, I think, so that makes sense. Finishes upgrading their labs, plays a cannon, and builds a cannon. And disbands that warrior that they built last turn to build a second cannon. So, yeah. I guess they probably built this warrior for colonies, but ended up just being a waste of 2 military actions and 2 rocks, unfortunately. Anyway, it's my turn, and now especially with the shock troops, but even without the shock troops, I would have been able to war enough. Actually, we could have calculated the Modern Army last turn, so war cost me 3 military actions, so I had 4 left, so that was obviously enough to build 2 units and the air forces to get 1 army plus 1 air force going. Even with the shock troops, though, I have just barely enough military actions to play the shock troops too. So that's definitely nice. The question is just who to war. The difference... So let's get... Okay, I paused in time. So we can see Cleveland has a lot of rocks, but they only have 3 military actions, and that's their major weakness. Not only that, they don't have enough science to get more military actions with either military theory or fundamentalism. So that severely limits the amount of strength Cleveland can threaten. Them building 2 cannons here was a pretty strong tell for me that they had mechanized army in their hand. But even with mechanized army, we can calculate that with only 3 military actions, having to spend 1 of them to play the mechanized army, they just will not have enough to threaten that much strength. Sazmer only has 7 rocks, but they do have right now, but they do have these 2 yellow cards, and they have a bunch of military actions. So overall, I won't go through the we can do a bit of calculations right now. So Cleveland, let's say they build 2 cannons and play mechanized army. The outdated mechanized army is only 5 strength, so the 2 cannons would put Cleveland at 25. Plus 6, so 31 strength. They could also potentially build a pro sports. I haven't counted the civil action, but yeah, they should be able to do that. So that would maybe put them at, let's see, what did I say? Yeah, 25, 31, like maybe 35 strength or so. Whereas Sazmer will have 4, 8, 15 rocks total. Sazmer upgrading 1 warrior to modern infantry will give them plus 12 to put them at 29. And then can get more. And it will also, but most importantly, the reason I ended up deciding to work Cleveland, I felt that it was pretty likely at this point that I should win. I'm going to be getting 2 big wars. And so I just wanted to avoid risks. And the problem is there's 1 copy of Air Forces left. And while chances are not that high it'll be revealed on Sazmer's turn, it certainly could be. And thanks to the revolutionary idea, Sazmer would be able to play the Air Forces and with the yellow cards be able to get a full classic army plus Air Forces going, and that would be a lot of strength. Whereas Cleveland does not have enough science to play the Air Forces. The Cold War has already been revealed. I discarded the international negotiations. So there was no way for Cleveland to get additional science except to win the developed territory, I guess, that I had seeded. But, Cleveland would at least have to put units into the developed territory, and it would get sketchy. So I felt that with the potential risk of air forces coming and Sasmur much more easily being able to play air forces than Cleveland, I thought it was safer to war Cleveland this turn. As for my turn itself, it's pretty straightforward. I want to build a full... with my reserves, I'm able to build a full shock troops army plus air forces. I destroy 2 of my mines to do it and stay out of uprising. Because of Bill Gates, the mines I think are definitely much less important than the farms and certainly the labs. I decide to also play an opera in order to win the Nobel Prize. So the question is just what to spend my last civil action on. And I could, for example, build an arena with it, but I decided to take the urban growth instead. I am going to be a little pressed on rocks next turn, because you'll see, so I'll have 14. With this reserves, I will have 19 thanks to the Silk Road bonus, and that will be just enough. I will be able to build 3 cavalrymen and upgrade a warrior to rifleman. 5, 10, 15, 18. So I'll have just enough to do those things with 1 rock remaining, thanks to this reserves. And this urban growth will potentially let me build an arena for free then, which seemed good. More important than building the arena this turn just for an extra point of strength in this war. I'm definitely winning the war regardless. I think I decided to keep 2 wars just in case I'm able to extend the game another turn. And other than that, I believe... Let's see. Oh, yeah. I have enough civil actions. I'm just able to discard the Ravages of Time that, if I'm going to be seeding... I'm not going to be seeding again during Age 3, right? I'm only going to seed on Age 4 when I can't war. Sasmur does seed, reveals that developed territory. Cleveland is not willing to bid for it because of the war declared against them, so Sasmur is able to win it for cheap, so that's fortunate for Sasmur. They play the patriotism to put it into military, but they also are willing to build a 3rd opera. I think, did Sasmur see? Yeah, Sasmur saw my card, so Sasmur knows for a fact that I have another war in my hand, and so knows that there is... I could very well declare that war against Sasmur this turn, so this 3rd theater seems pretty greedy to me. They also play the cannons and take some cards. Cleveland looks to defend. They do this. I think this is less strength than if they had built a 4th cannon instead of like upgrading this to cavalryman. But they would have had to wreck their economy more to build the 4th cannon. So I understand doing it this way. Doing it like this. They don't have enough signs to play the purse sports, but they can still avoid uprising. So I think that's fair enough. And they take reserves. They take 2 yellow cards. So even though this is less strength than they could have potentially built, to get much more strength than this, they would have had to destroy more buildings, which might have still been worth it, frankly. Maybe instead of this, they could have, like I said, destroyed that 2nd mine to build a 4th cannon, and then instead of playing the cavalrymen, they could play the pro sports and then destroy the temple to build up pro sports, for example. That might have been better. Certainly would have lost them a lot less culture on this war. They still would have lost the war, though. But yeah, after warring Cleveland, it seemed only natural or fair to war Sasmur 2. It seemed only fair to war Sasmur 2. Like I said, with the reserves, I am just able to get a 2nd full army going, putting me up to 77 strength. Pretty nice amount. I do have to destroy... Let's see, I take the democracy. Yeah, I'm able to play the democracy. I have to destroy the farm to get out of uprising. And instead of building this arena for 1 extra strength, I decided to just play the multimedia in order to win the Nobel Prize. That's... Instead of getting 1 more culture or 2 culture swing on the war, this gives me 4 extra culture. Seems worth it. Yeah, I think this is pretty clearly the best turn for me to take. And, Sasmur is definitely gonna end the age too, so there's no point thinking about that. Sazmar Seas reveals that political strength that I seeded. That gives me 5 extra cards, which is theoretically nice. Fortunately, none of them are good for me, except, you know, the plunder I already have, 2 wars that I'm not gonna be able to do, peace treaty that I have no reason to offer, and an impact that I would lose if I seeded. So event ended up actually being useless for me. At least it cost Sazmar draws. Sazmar decides to build that per sports, and has enough to build an air forces. So it looks like building this opera, if they hadn't built it, they would have been able to build another military unit for 5. So I guess building the opera ended up not really costing them culture, because they lost 5 more culture than they would have otherwise, but they're gaining, I guess, 6 culture at least from the opera. So I guess I take back what I said. It made sense to build this 3rd opera. And they take in movies. Age 4 begins. Cleveland increases the population, plays the endowment, plays the civil service, and upgrades their military a little more. Maybe building some movies instead of the civil service could be considered, but maybe Cleveland had seeded like a did Cleveland seed? I think they did earlier. There may be an impact that Cleveland seeded that justifies the civil service. I take 40 culture from Sazmar, so my 2 wars come in. Okay, I guess I'll talk about the aggression first. So I thought about any of these impacts, but none of them were actually good for me. I think at best they were neutral. So I decided to go for the Occupy instead, because the Occupy, as we will see, lets me build this opera, upgrade a farm, so this gets me above the consumption line for potential impact of agriculture, as well as impact of balance. And I still have just enough rocks left to build a 2nd opera. So if I had played the plunder instead, I could have plundered 4 additional rocks, but there wasn't really anything good I could build with those 4 rocks. So the Occupy just seemed strictly better. It's also nice because the Occupy stole their food from Sazmar, meaning that Sazmar is going to have to build a farm to get out of corruption. To get out of famine, sorry. And obviously stealing an extra 3 culture. So that's why I did the Occupy. I ended up, let's see, I got 40 culture from this war and 31 from the previous. So I got 71 total culture from my 2 wars. Not bad. Sazmar Seas, revealing an impact of population. This is an impact that I actually win by a little bit. Sazmar, unfortunately, all they can really do is build that farm. I'm not sure why they built the AJ farm instead of the Age 1 farm, because they had... Yeah, they definitely had the rocks for the Age 1 farm, so... Before the final impacts, we can see that thanks to my 2 big wars, I am almost certainly going to win this game. So it's really a contest between Cleveland and Sazmar, who will come in first and second. Cleveland currently has a 13 culture lead, but depending on the impacts, obviously, that could shift a lot. First impact is an impact of architecture. This one helps Sazmar a lot. Sazmar is now only 4 points behind Cleveland. Next is an impact of harmony. This is really bad for me, but it doesn't really matter. But this one helps Sazmar, and now Sazmar is actually tied with Cleveland. The third impact is an impact of science. This one I do win, but again, it doesn't really matter. This was likely seeded by Cleveland, giving Cleveland now a 7-point lead over Sazmar. Next is an impact of strength, the one that I seeded. This one is also good for Cleveland, unfortunately by only 1 point, as we can see. So Sazmar is now 14 behind Cleveland. Seems unlikely that they'll be able to overtake Cleveland at this point, and indeed they can't, because the last one is an impact of wonders that gives Cleveland 1 extra point. And after my Bill Gates bonus, we can see that I end up winning this game by almost a full 100 points. That's 97, I think. Wait. No, 95. Yeah. I won by 95 points, and Cleveland is second by 15. So, overall, I'd say this was a pretty smooth game for me. There were just a few cases. If Cleveland had chose to aggress that enslave back in age 1, if Cleveland had played that against me and not Sazmer, things definitely might have gone very differently. That one population loss would have been pretty devastating for me. But luckily, Sazmer, Sazmer, the aggression was guaranteed against, so I think it was right from Cleveland's position. But aside from that, like, Cleveland pushing strength so fast, it gave me a few danger moments. There was when I risked the aggression in age 2 when I played Nobel. But aside from that, I felt that I was able to do a pretty good job with Genghis Khan of keeping up in strength. And then in age 2, being able to get that early government form let me just get my economy going pretty strongly and set me up well for age 3. And then obviously in age 3, I lucked out getting Bill Gates plus computers early. When you get an early Bill Gates plus computers, it's just kind of hard not to win. I mean, it's not like the game is necessarily over then or anything. I think in that position where I was already arguably in the best position thanks to having the best balance of economy and military, getting such a huge charge from Bill Gates computers just put me over the top. And I think I probably could have won peacefully too, but I drew to war, so I decided to go for wars instead, and thanks to my huge economy with Bill Gates, I was able to get 2 huge wars against my opponents. Maybe they could have played differently to defend a bit better than they did. I think perhaps my opponents underestimated my strength potential, because I did leap in strength kind of a lot over the course of 2 turns, but that's what you can do with Bill Gates too, so. But my point is, I think maybe my opponents could have played a little more defensively and a little more safely against my military threat, but I think if they had, I probably could have still won peacefully and probably still would have beaten them in wars just because of the strength of Bill Gates' computers. So, yeah, Bill Gates, kind of a busted card when you get him early in age 3, with computers especially. So, that's how things go sometimes. Hope you found this game interesting regardless. I think there were definitely a few interesting decision points for me along the way. But before I end the video, let's take a quick look at the standings. So that game, standings-wise, ended about as well for me as it possibly could have. Not only did I win the game, bringing me to 17 points in the group, but Sazmer, who along with Fat Hope is more of a competition than Cleveland at this point to me, lost the game and got 0 points from it. So at this point, I am significantly ahead of Sazmer with 1 less game played. I am tied in number of games played with Fat Hope, but I'm 9 points ahead of them. So that's a pretty substantial lead. Not insurmountable, of course. I still have 2 3-player games left against Fat Hope and a 2-player game, so there's still a lot of room for Fat Hope to come back, but I'm definitely in a good position to win the group. But again, just being in a good position isn't enough. I have less than half of my total amount of games played at the moment, so can't let up and we'll see how I do in my remaining 3-player games in the next 2 videos, and they've both ended already, so those should come pretty soon. In the meantime, though, if you have any comments on either my video making or my gameplay, I'm looking to improve in both aspects, so please let me know, either, compliments or constructive criticisms. I'm open to either. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one.